The wind howled like a wounded animal through the canyon, driving sheets of snow sideways across the narrow trail. Samuel Hawkins pulled his collar higher against his weathered jaw and squinted through the white fury. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Duchess, picked her way carefully along the icy path, her breath coming in great clouds of steam that the wind snatched away instantly. Samuel had been drifting for the better part of 3 years now, ever since the war ended and left him with nothing to return to. Virginia seemed like another lifetime, another man's life, out here in the territories. A man could lose himself in the vastness, could work when he needed coin and move on when the walls of civilization pressed too close. The winter had caught him between towns, but he'd weathered worse. At least, that's what he told himself as another gust nearly knocked him from the saddle. He was making for an abandoned homesteader's cabin he'd spotted 2 days back. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls and most of a roof, but it would serve until the storm passed. The light was failing fast, that peculiar gray twilight that came with heavy snow, when everything looked the same and a man could ride in circles until he froze to death. Then he heard it. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks, the way it sometimes did when it whistled through the rocks. But there it was again, a thin, keening sound that didn't belong to any storm. Human, female, and close. Samuel reined in Duchess, turning his head to catch the direction. The mare's ears swiveled, and she snorted uneasily. Animals always knew when something wasn't right. The sound came again, weaker this time, from somewhere off to his left where the trail widened into what might have been a clearing in better weather. "Easy, girl," he murmured, guiding Duchess off the path. The snow was deeper here, coming up past her knees, but she pushed through gamely. The keening had stopped, which worried him more than the sound itself. In weather like this, silence usually meant death was winning. Through the swirling white, he caught sight of something dark against the base of a gnarled cottonwood. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into something that made his jaw tighten, and his hand move instinctively to the colt at his hip. A woman, tied to the tree with what looked like old rope, her head hanging forward, dark hair matted with snow and something else, blood, from the looks of it. She wore only a thin dress, torn in places, and her feet were bare, for God's sake, in this weather. No coat, no shawl, nothing but that pitiful dress that might have been blue once. Samuel swung down from Duchess before the horse had fully stopped, his boots crunching through the snow. Up close, he could see the damage more clearly, and it made something cold and hard settle in his chest. Her face was swollen, one eye puffed shut, lips split and crusted with dried blood. Bruises mottled her arms where the sleeves had been torn away. This wasn't the work of the storm or some accident. This was deliberate. This was cruel. "Ma'am?" His voice came out rougher than intended. He pulled off his gloves, fumbling for the knife at his belt. The rope was frayed and ice-crusted, and it took several cuts to get through it. As soon as the bonds fell away, she slumped forward. He caught her before she could fall face first into the snow. She was light as a bird, all sharp bones under that thin dress. Her skin felt like ice where his hands touched her arms. But when he shifted her weight, she made that keening sound again. Alive. Then, barely, but alive. "Can you hear me?" He kept his voice low, gentle, the way he'd talk to a spooked horse. Her good eye fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain and cold. She tried to speak, but only a whisper of breath came out. Beside the tree, half buried in snow, he spotted a worn canvas bag. He snagged it with one hand while supporting her with the other. Whatever was in it might tell him something about who she was or who had done this to her. "I'm going to lift you up now," he said, though he wasn't sure she could understand. Get you somewhere warm. She made a sound that might have been protest or plea. Her fingers clutched weakly at his coat sleeve, and he could feel her trembling. Or maybe that was just the shaking that came before the final cold set in. Getting her onto Duchess took some doing. She couldn't stand on her own, and he ended up lifting her bodily, settling her sideways across the saddle before swinging up behind her. He arranged his coat around both of them as best he could, pulling her back against his chest. She was so cold it was like holding a block of ice. "I'll keep you safe," he heard himself say, the words coming unbidden. Strange thing to promise a stranger, especially out here where safety was just another word for luck. But something about the deliberate cruelty of her abandonment, the calculation of tying her out in a storm, it rankled him in ways he didn't want to examine too closely. Duchess seemed to understand the urgency. She moved faster now, despite the extra weight and the worsening weather. Samuel kept one arm tight around the woman's waist, feeling the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could smell blood and fear and something floral that might have been perfume once upon a time. The wind picked up, driving the snow horizontal. He could barely see Duchess's ears, let alone the trail. But the mare had the scent of shelter now, and he trusted her instincts more than his own eyes. Time stretched strange in the white blindness. Could have been minutes or hours before the dark bulk of the cabin materialized out of the storm. It wasn't much to look at. The door hung crooked on leather hinges, and snow had drifted through gaps in the walls. But the roof was mostly intact, and the stone chimney still stood. It would do. Samuel half fell from the saddle, catching himself against Duchess's solid flank. His legs had gone numb from the cold and the awkward position. The woman didn't stir when he pulled her down. Dead weight in his arms. He kicked the door open and stumbled inside, laying her carefully on the packed earth floor. First things first, he needed fire, and fast. There was a stack of old wood in the corner, left by whoever had abandoned this place. Probably dried out and full of rot, but it would burn. His hands shook as he arranged kindling in the old fireplace, and it took 3 tries to get a spark from his flint and steel. But finally, blessedly, orange flames began to lick at the wood. Only then did he go back for Duchess, leading her around to the lean-to attached to the cabin's side. It wasn't ideal, but it would keep the worst of the wind off her. He unsaddled her quickly, rubbing her down with handfuls of old straw, making sure she had water from his canteen. She'd earned her grain tonight, that was certain. Back inside. The woman hadn't moved. In the growing firelight, she looked even worse, face a map of bruises, dress torn and stained with blood. Someone had worked her over good and proper before tying her to that tree. Someone who'd wanted her to suffer before she died. Samuel found his small pot and packed it with snow, setting it close to the fire to melt. He'd need water to clean her wounds, and she'd need something warm inside her if she was going to make it through the night. While it heated, he opened the canvas bag he'd found. Inside were a few personal items, a horn comb, a small mirror with a cracked surface, a Bible with pages swollen from moisture. There was a letter, too, though the ink had run in places. He could make out a few words. Shame. Scandal. Never darken, before he folded it carefully and put it back. Whatever her story, it could wait. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in what might have been a petticoat once, he found a man's gold pocket watch and a small leather purse with a few coins. The watch was inscribed, "To William, with all my love, C." So she had a name that started with C, and there was a William somewhere in her past. Maybe the one who'd done this to her. Maybe not. The water was warm now. Samuel tore strips from his spare shirt, dipping them in the pot. He knelt beside her, hesitating. He'd doctored plenty of men during the war, but this felt different, more intimate, more dangerous, somehow. "Ma'am, I'm going to clean these cuts now," he said, though her eyes remained closed. "Might sting some." He started with her face, gentle as he could manage with his rough hands. The water turned pink, then red. Some of the cuts were deep enough they'd likely scar. Whoever had done this had wanted to mark her, not just hurt her. The thought made his jaw clench again. She stirred when he cleaned the worst gash, the one that ran from her temple to her jaw. Her good eye opened, focused on him with surprising clarity. "No," she whispered, trying to pull away. "Please, no more." "Easy," he said, sitting back on his heels. "I'm not going to hurt you, just trying to help." She stared at him for a long moment. Then something in her seemed to recognize he wasn't whoever she'd thought he was. The tension went out of her, and she closed her eye again. "Safe," she murmured, so quiet he almost missed it. "Said, safe." "That's right," Samuel said, surprised she'd heard and remembered his words from earlier. "You're safe now." He finished cleaning what wounds he could reach without undressing her. That was a line he wouldn't cross, not without her conscious permission. Instead, he pulled his bedroll from his pack and wrapped it around her, then positioned her closer to the fire. The shaking had stopped, which he took as a good sign. Now she just needed warmth and rest. For himself, he made do with his coat and saddle blanket, positioning himself between her and the door. Not that he expected trouble, no one would be moving in this storm. But old habits died hard. Outside, the wind continued its assault on the cabin walls. Snow filtered through the gaps, little white serpents that melted before they hit the floor. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. Samuel watched the woman sleep. If you could call that restless, twitching sleep, in repose. Despite the bruises and swelling, he could see she'd been pretty once. Young, too, maybe 25, no more than 30. Someone's daughter, someone's sweetheart, judging by that watch. What kind of man tied a woman to a tree in a snowstorm? The same kind who'd beat her bloody first. Apparently. Samuel had seen plenty of cruelty in his time, but there was something about deliberate violence against those who couldn't fight back that stuck in his craw. She'd loved the wrong man. That much was clear from the letter and the inscription. In towns like these, that could be a death sentence for a woman, especially if the man had power position, maybe a wife already. The good people of civilization could be mighty creative in their punishments for those who broke the unwritten rules. Well, she was out of their reach now. Whatever happened come morning, whatever her story, she'd made it through this night. Samuel had promised to keep her safe, and he was a man who kept his promises, few as he made them. The fire burned lower, and he fed it another piece of wood. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. She'd need food, proper shelter, maybe a doctor if they could find one. And there was always the chance someone would come looking for her, wanting to finish what they'd started. But that was tomorrow's worry. Tonight, there was just the fire and the storm and two strangers sharing warmth against the cold. Samuel pulled his coat tighter and settled in to wait for dawn, one hand resting on the Colt at his side, just in case those promises proved harder to keep than he'd thought. The storm raged through the night like a living thing trying to tear the cabin apart board by board. Samuel dozed fitfully, jerking awake each time the wind found a new gap to whistle through or when the woman stirred in her uneasy sleep. By the time gray dawn light filtered through the cracks, his back ached from sitting propped against the wall and his eyes felt full of sand. The woman, see, he thought of her, for want of a better name, had survived the night, though her breathing remained shallow and her skin still felt too cold when he checked her forehead. The fire had burned down to embers, and the temperature in the cabin had dropped enough that his breath misted in the air. First order of business, more wood. Samuel stretched the kinks from his spine and ventured outside. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay 3 feet deep in places, sculpted into fantastic drifts by the wind. The sky overhead was that crystalline blue that only came after blizzards. So bright it hurt to look at. Duchess wickered a greeting from the lean-to, pawing at the snow. She'd weathered the night well enough, though ice hung from her mane like Christmas decorations. He fed her the last of the grain from his saddlebags and broke the ice on her water bucket. "Good girl," he murmured, running a hand along her neck. "We'll find you proper feed soon." The woodpile behind the cabin was mostly buried, but he managed to dig out enough logs to last the day. His shoulder protested, an old injury from Antietam that liked to remind him of its presence in cold weather, but he ignored it. Inside, he built the fire back up until flames crackled cheerfully, pushing back the cold. C hadn't moved from where he'd left her. In the better light, he could see details he'd missed the night before. Her dress had once been a deep blue wool, well made with tiny buttons down the front. City clothes, not frontier wear. Her hands, despite the bruising, were soft, uncalloused. Whatever her story, she hadn't been born to hardship. Samuel set about making what breakfast he could from his meager supplies. Coffee first. A man could face most anything with hot coffee in his belly. Then a pot of porridge from the oats he carried for Duchess. Not much of a meal, but it would warm them from the inside. The smell of coffee must have reached her because C stirred, making a small sound of pain. Her good eye opened, blinked, focused on him with confusion and then alarm. "Easy," Samuel said, staying where he was by the fire. No sense spooking her by looming. "You're safe, remember? Found you in the storm last night." She tried to sit up, gasped, and fell back. One hand went to her ribs, and he figured she probably had a few cracked ones to go with everything else. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, raw from cold or screaming or both. "Where?" "Old homestead cabin, about 10 miles north of Perdition." He poured coffee into his 1-tin cup, diluted it with hot water, and added a generous spoonful of sugar. "Think you can manage some of this?" She nodded minutely. He approached slowly, telegraphing his movements, and helped her sit up enough to drink. She had to use both hands to hold the cup steady, but she managed a few sips before exhaustion took over. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then, "Clara," another sip. "Clara Mayfield." So C for Clara. It suited her, he thought, a gentle name for what seemed, despite her current state, a gentlewoman. "Samuel Hawkins," he offered in return. "Sam, mostly." "Thank you," she whispered, for stopping. Any decent man would have done the same. A bitter smile twisted her split lips. "You'd be surprised." He let that pass, focusing on spooning porridge into a bowl. "Think you can eat something? You need strength." Clara managed about half the bowl before pushing it away. Even that small effort exhausted her. Samuel could see her fighting to stay conscious, to stay alert. He recognized the look, had seen it in soldiers who'd been captured, who'd learned that relaxing meant danger. "No one's going to hurt you here," he said quietly. "You can rest." "They'll come," she said, and there was certainty in her voice. He won't let it stand." "Who?" But she was already sliding back towards sleep, the coffee and warmth working on her like laudanum. Samuel caught the cup before it could fall, settled her back down, and tucked the blankets more securely around her. He spent the morning seeing to necessities. The cabin, while shelter, wasn't much more than that. Gaps in the walls let in wind and snow. The door hung crooked. One corner of the roof had started to sag, but with work, it could be made tight enough to last until Clara was strong enough to travel. Samuel had learned to work with what was at hand during the war and after. He packed the worst gaps with a mixture of mud and straw from the lean-to, chinking them like his grandfather had taught him back in Virginia. The door took more doing. The leather hinges had rotted through. He ended up using strips cut from his saddle's latigo to rehang it. By noon, the cabin was noticeably warmer. Clara woke again, more lucid this time. She watched him work, saying nothing, but he could feel her eyes following his movements. "Hungry?" he asked. "Yes." A pause. I need to..." He understood immediately. "There's an outhouse out back. Snow's deep, but I've cut a path. Can you walk?" She tried to stand and nearly fell. Samuel caught her elbow, careful not to grab too hard. She flinched anyway, then steadied herself. "I can manage," she said with quiet dignity. He helped her outside, then waited on the porch, giving her privacy. She moved like an old woman, each step careful and pained. When she emerged, her face was gray with effort, but she'd rewrapped the blanket around herself like armor. Back inside, he heated more porridge, added dried apples from his pack to sweeten it. This time she ate it all, slowly but steadily. Color began to return to her cheeks. "I should explain," she said when she'd finished. "Only if you want to." She stared into the fire. "You have a right to know what trouble you've taken on. I've handled trouble before. Not like this." She pulled the blanket tighter. "His name is William Thornton. He owns half of Perdition, the bank, the hotel, 2 saloons. His wife's family founded the town." Samuel nodded, beginning to understand. "Men like that thought they owned everything in their domain, including the people. I was a school teacher," Clara continued. "Came west 2 years ago after my parents died. It seemed like an adventure." Her laugh was bitter. "William was charming, attentive. He said his marriage was loveless, arranged by their families. Said he'd leave her for me." An old story, Samuel thought, as old as time. "I believed him." Her voice dropped. "I was fool enough to believe him. We were together, discreetly, I thought. But his wife found out. She has cousins, brothers, hard men." "They did this to you?" "They dragged me from my room at the boarding house. Said I needed to be taught a lesson about trying to rise above my station. About tempting good men into sin." Her hand went unconsciously to her face. They wanted to mark me, so everyone would know what I was. Then they tied me to that tree. Said the cold would finish what they started. Rage, cold and clean, settled in Samuel's gut. He'd known men like that too. Men who confused power with righteousness, who hurt others because they could. William didn't try to stop them? William watched. The words came out flat, dead. He stood there in his fine coat and watched them beat me. Then he left with his wife. Samuel had to stand, to move, or he might break something. He fed more wood to the fire, checked the coffee pot, looked out the window at the pristine snow. When he trusted his voice again, he asked, "You have people? Family? Somewhere to go?" "No one. Nothing." She looked up at him then, and he saw steel beneath the bruises. "But I'll not go back to Perdition. I'll walk to California first. I'll freeze in another storm, but I'll not go back. And no one's asking you to. They'll come looking. William won't want loose ends in, and his wife. She'll want to make sure the lesson took. Samuel considered this. The cabin was isolated but not hidden. If they came looking, they'd find it eventually. And 2 people on 1 horse couldn't outrun a pursuit. Not with Clara in her condition. Let them come, he said finally. Clara looked at him sharply. You don't know what you're saying. These aren't good men, Sam. They're not bound by law or decency. Neither am I, particularly. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she didn't argue further. Instead, she asked, Why did you stop, really? It was Samuel's turn to stare into the fire. How to explain the impulse that had made him turn Duchess off the trail? The war had burned most of the softness out of him, but some things still mattered. Had to matter. Or what was the point of surviving? My sister, he said finally. Back in Virginia. She married a man who, well, by the time I came home from the war, it was too late. Found her grave and him gone to Texas. He shrugged. Can't change the past. But I could stop last night. Clara absorbed this in silence. Then I'm grateful, more than I can say. Rest now, Samuel said, uncomfortable with thanks. Build your strength. We'll deal with tomorrow when it comes. She settled back into the blankets, but he could see she was thinking. Planning. Good. She'd need that steel in her spine for what was coming. The afternoon passed quietly. Samuel tended to Duchess, hauled more wood, melted snow for water. He found an old axe head in the lean-to and fitted it with a new handle carved from a pine branch. It wasn't pretty, but it would cut. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the snow pink and gold, he made a decision. He couldn't defend the cabin indefinitely, not if they came in force, but he could make it costly for them. He could make them think twice. He laid out his weapons on the rough table, the Colt, a Winchester rifle, a skinning knife, the newly handled axe. Not an arsenal, but he'd worked with less. The war had taught him that determination counted for more than numbers. Clara watched him clean and check each weapon. You're expecting them soon. Maybe tonight, more likely tomorrow. Depends how bad they want you back. They'll want me back. She said it with certainty. William can't afford the scandal. A mistress who disappears when who might talk. His wife won't stand for it. Samuel loaded the rifle, set it by the door. Then we'd best be ready. That night, he brought Duchess inside. The mare didn't like it much, but she'd be safer here than in the lean-to if shooting started. Clara had protested weakly. It's not proper. But practicality won out. Proper was a luxury they couldn't afford. They ate a spare supper of jerky and hardtack softened in coffee. Clara managed to stay awake longer this time, even helped tend the fire. The swelling around her eye had gone down some, and she could open it part way. Progress. Tell me about California, she said as darkness pressed against the windows. So Samuel told her what he'd heard from other drifters. Gold fields played out, but land still cheap. Orange groves in the south. San Francisco growing wild and lawless. Places where a person could reinvent themselves, where the past mattered less than the present. Maybe I'll see it someday, Clara murmured. Maybe we both will. The word hung between them. We. As if they were partnered in this beyond the immediate crisis. Samuel hadn't meant to say it, but he didn't take it back either. When Clara finally slept, he took up his post by the door again. The night was clear, stars sharp as glass in the black sky. Cold radiated through the walls despite his repairs. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, answered by another. The watched feeling started around midnight. Nothing Samuel could point to specifically, just a prickle at the back of his neck that said he and Clara weren't alone anymore. He checked the rifle, made sure the Colt was loose in its holster, but the night passed without incident. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe they had more time than he'd thought. Or maybe whoever was out there was waiting for daylight, for better odds. Dawn came pale and cold. Samuel made coffee, coaxed Clara to eat more porridge. She was steadier on her feet today, though still moving carefully. The bruises had turned spectacular colors, purple and green and yellow, but her eyes were clearer. "I should wash," she said, gesturing at her torn dress. "I must look—" "You look like you survived," Samuel said firmly. "That's all that matters." Still, he heated water for her, rigged a blanket across one corner of the cabin for privacy. While she cleaned up as best she could, he stepped outside to scan the horizon. That's when he saw them, 3 riders picking their way along the trail from the south. Still a ways off, but coming steady. Samuel stepped back inside, kept his voice calm. "Company coming. 3 men. Clara went very still behind the blanket. "I'm not going back." "No," Samuel agreed, checking the Colt. "You're not—" She emerged, hair damp and pulled back, wearing the blanket like a shawl over her ruined dress. Despite everything, there was dignity in her bearing. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay inside, keep low. If things go bad—" He handed her the skinning knife. "You know how to use this?" She took it without hesitation. "I'll learn." Samuel positioned himself on the porch, rifle casual in his hands but ready. The riders were closer now, close enough to make out details. The one in front wore a city coat, out of place in this wilderness. William Thornton had to be. The other 2 were rougher, probably the cousins or brothers Clara had mentioned. They stopped just out of easy rifle range, which told Samuel they weren't complete fools. "Oh, hello, the cabin," Thornton called. His voice carried the easy authority of a man used to being obeyed. "That's close enough," Samuel called back. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. Don't recall finding any property, just a woman near frozen to death." Thornton nudged his horse a few steps closer. In the clear morning light, Samuel could see he was handsome in that soft way city men often were, smooth-shaven, well-fed, with hands that had never known hard labor. "That woman is my concern. I'd be obliged if you'd send her out." "I can't do that." "I could make it worth your while. Say, $50? "Not interested." Thornton's companions shifted restlessly. One of them, a barrel-chested man with a week's worth of beard, spoke up. "We're wasting time. William, there's 3 of us and 1 of him." "2, Clara said, stepping onto the porch. She held the knife like she meant it. "There's 2 of us." Thornton's face went tight at the sight of her. "Clara, you've caused a great deal of trouble." "I've caused trouble?" Her voice rose. "You let them beat me. You let them tie me to a tree to die. Yet you knew what you were risking. A woman of your background. Should have known better than to reach above herself." Samuel felt Clara tense beside him. He kept his eyes on the 3 men, watching for any sudden moves. "My background," Clara said slowly, "is that I'm a free woman who makes her own choices. I chose wrong with you, William, but that's done now. Nothing's done until I say it is." Thornton's mask of civility was slipping. "You'll come back with us. We'll find somewhere appropriate for you. Somewhere you can't spread lies." "The only liar here is you," Clara shot back. The barrel-chested man had heard enough. He started to reach for his gun, and that's when everything went to hell. The Winchester bucked against Samuel's shoulder as he fired, the sound cracking sharp in the cold morning air. The barrel-chested man's gun flew from his hand as he cursed and grabbed his wrist. Not a killing shot. Samuel had aimed to disarm, not kill. Yet. "Next one goes center mass," Samuel said calmly, working the rifle's lever. "Your choice, gentlemen." The third rider, younger than the others with mean eyes and a patchy beard, had his hand frozen halfway to his holster. Thornton had gone pale, his city-bred confidence evaporating in the face of actual violence. "You're making a mistake," Thornton said, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know enough." Samuel kept the rifle steady. "I know you're the kind of man who watches while others beat a woman. That tells me all I need to know." The wounded man, Clara had called them cousins or brothers, was cradling his hand against his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers. "You broke my damn wrist. You'll live. Question is whether you want to keep living." Clara stood straight beside him, the knife still in her hand. In the morning light, despite the bruises and swelling, Samuel could see the strength in her. She'd been a school teacher. She'd said. He could picture it, her in a proper dress, teaching letters to frontier children, believing in the promise of a new life out west. "We should go," the younger one muttered. "Jake needs a doctor." But Thornton wasn't ready to give up. His kind never was. Samuel knew. Men who'd always gotten their way couldn't conceive of a world where they didn't. "You can't protect her forever," Thornton said. "One man, one cabin. I have resources, men, money, the law." "The law?" Clara laughed, sharp and bitter. "Where was the law when your wife's family dragged me from my room when they—" She stopped, took a breath. "The law in perdition is whatever you say it is, William, and we both know that." "And then you know fighting me is futile." "It may be." Samuel shifted the rifle slightly, noting how all three men tensed. "But I've got nowhere particular to be. And I'm curious how many men you're willing to lose over one woman." "She's not worth—" the younger one started, but Thornton cut him off with a gesture. "What do you want?" Thornton asked Samuel. "Money? I can pay." "Already said I'm not interested in your money." "Then what?" Samuel considered, what did he want? Yesterday, all he'd wanted was shelter from the storm. Now it was more complicated. "I want you to leave," he said finally. "Turn those horses around and ride away. Don't come back. Let the lady be." "I can't do that." "Sure you can. Tell your wife Clara died in the storm. Tell her the lesson was learned. Tell her whatever lets you both sleep at night." Thornton's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "And if I refuse? Then we find out how good your men are in a fight. Jake, there's already out of it. That leaves two of you against a man who survived 4 years of war and has nothing much to lose." Samuel smiled, cold as the morning. "I like my odds." The silence stretched taut. A raven called somewhere in the distance, harsh and mocking. The horses stamped and blew steam in the cold air. Finally, Thornton turned to his men. "We're leaving." "William," Jake protested, "you can't just—" "If we're leaving," Thornton repeated, steel in his voice now. He looked at Clara one last time. "This isn't over." "Yes," Clara said quietly, "and it is." They watched the 3 men ride away, Jake awkward in the saddle with his injured wrist. Only when they disappeared over a rise did Samuel lower the rifle. "They'll be back," Clara said. "Maybe, maybe not. Men like Thornton are cowards at heart. They only fight when the odds favor them." Clara sank down on the porch step, suddenly shaking. The knife fell from her fingers. Samuel sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Risk yourself for me." "Seemed like I did." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I should tell you the rest. If you're going to be in danger because of me, you should know all of it. You don't owe me explanations. I owe you the truth. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I wasn't just his mistress. I was carrying his child. Samuel kept his face neutral, though inside he felt a fresh surge of anger. The picture was becoming clearer. Who was? He asked gently. I lost it. 3 weeks ago, the strain, I think. Or maybe God's mercy, I don't know. Her voice was steady, but tears tracked down her bruised cheeks. I told William. I thought he should know. That's when everything went wrong. He was afraid you'd make a claim on him. His wife can't have children. It's why their marriage is so cold, he said. But a bastard child. Proof of his infidelity. She wiped her face with the corner of the blanket. He said I'd done it on purpose, to trap him. As if I wanted to be ruined, cast out. Samuel had seen all kinds of cruelty during the war, but this cut different. This was personal, intimate betrayal, the kind that broke something inside a person. What happened then? I was going to leave. I'd saved enough for stage fare to Denver, maybe further. But his wife found out first. One of the other boarders at the house. She saw William leaving my room. Gossip travels fast in a small town. And she sent her family after you. Clara nodded. 3 nights ago. They came while I was packing. Said they were going to teach me what happened to whores who tried to break up godly marriages. She touched her face unconsciously. They wanted to make sure no other man would look at me. Then William came. For a moment I thought he'd come to help me. But he just watched. Told them not to kill me, that would cause too much talk. But otherwise he let them do what they wanted. When they were done, they dragged me out of town, said the cold would finish their work, make it look like an accident. A foolish woman caught in a storm. She looked at Samuel. They didn't count on anyone riding that trail. They didn't count on you. Samuel stood, paced to the edge of the porch. The morning sun was climbing higher, turning the snow to blazing white. Duchess whickered from inside the cabin, probably wanting her breakfast. We need to move, he said. They might not come back today, but this cabin's no fortress. And you need supplies, proper clothes. I have money. Clara stood too, steadier now. In the bag. Not much, but enough for... Keep your money. We'll manage. We. She looked at him with those bruised eyes. You've done enough. More than enough. I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering... He turned to face her. There's a trading post about 2 days north, Murphy Station. Old Murphy doesn't ask questions if your money's good. We can get what you need there. Figure out the next step. And then? Then we see. Maybe Denver, maybe California, maybe somewhere else entirely. World's big enough to lose yourself in, if you know how. Clara studied him for a long moment. Why? She asked again. Really, why? Samuel thought about how to answer. The truth was complicated. Part of it was his sister, yes. Part of it was simple decency. But part of it was something else. Something about the way she'd stood beside him with that knife, ready to fight. Something about the steel under her schoolteacher softness. Because everyone deserves a second chance, he said finally. Even, especially those who loved the wrong person. She nodded slowly. All right, Murphy Station. They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Clara, moving carefully but with purpose, helped pack what supplies they had. She found a needle and thread in her bag, began mending the worst tears in her dress. It wouldn't make it respectable, but it would hold together. Samuel saw to Duchess checking her hooves for ice damage, making sure she was sound for travel. The mare would have to carry double again, at least until they could get Clara her own mount. It would slow them down. But there was no help for it. As he worked, Clara told him more about her life before. Her parents had run a small shop in Ohio, dry goods and notions. They'd wanted more for her than a shopkeeper's life, had scripted and saved to send her to normal school. They were so proud when I got my teaching certificate, she said, working the needle through fabric. Said I'd make something of myself, have a respectable life. You still can. Can I? A woman with no references, no family, no connections? Who'll hire a teacher who ran off with a married man? Then don't be a teacher, be something else. She looked at him curiously. Just like that? Just like that. One thing the frontier teaches you, you can be whoever you need to be. Nobody checks your papers out here. And who are you, Samuel Hawkins? Who do you need to be? It was a fair question. Right now, I'm a man helping a friend get to safety. That's enough. Friend, she tested the word. Is that what we are? If you'll have me. She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face despite the bruises. I'd be honored to call you friend. They set out after noon, when the sun had taken the worst edge off the cold. Clara rode in front again, wrapped in every spare piece of clothing they had. Samuel had fashioned a kind of cushion from the blankets to make the ride easier on her injured ribs. The cabin fell away behind them, and with it, the first chapter of whatever this was becoming. Samuel didn't look back. He'd learned long ago that forward was the only direction worth going. The trail wound through stands of pine and aspen, following the contours of the land. Snow muffled Duchess's hoofbeats, except for the occasional call of a bird or crack of ice falling from branches. The world was silent. They made good time despite riding double. Clara didn't complain, though Samuel could feel her tensing when the trail got rough. He kept up a steady stream of talk, stories from his travels, descriptions of places he'd seen, anything to distract her from the pain. Tell me about Virginia, she said during one of their brief rests. So he did. Told her about green hills and sweet water, about the farm his family had worked for generations until the war took it all, about coming home to find everything changed, everyone gone. Is that when you started drifting? You seemed like the thing to do, nothing to stay for, whole frontier to see. Don't you get lonely? Sometime. He helped her back onto Duchess. Less so lately. They pushed on as the shadows grew long. Samuel wanted to make the halfway point by nightfall, a grove of cottonwoods with a good spring that didn't freeze. They'd have to camp rough, but it was defensible and had water. As they rode, he stayed alert for any sign of pursuit, but the back trail remained empty. Maybe Thornton had decided to cut his losses. Maybe. The sun was just touching the mountains when they reached the cottonwood grove. Samuel had camped here before, knew the best spots. He helped Clara down, noting how she moved a little easier now. Still painful, but healing. It's beautiful, she said, looking at how the last light turned the white bark to gold. Wait until you see the stars. Out here, away from town lights, it's like God scattered diamonds across black velvet. He set up camp with practiced efficiency, gathered wood, built a fire, rigged a shelter from pine boughs and his canvas tarp. Not much, but it would keep the worst of the wind off. Clara helped where she could, learning by watching. She was quick, he noticed, picked things up fast, good traits for the frontier. They ate salt pork and pan bread, washed down with strong coffee. Simple fare, but Clara didn't complain. As darkness fell and the stars emerged just as he'd promised, She sat close to the fire, staring up in wonder. "I never saw stars like this in Ohio," she murmured. "It's different out here. Everything's different." "Yes." She looked at him across the fire. "I'm beginning to see that." Later, as she slept wrapped in blankets on one side of the fire and he kept watch on the other, Samuel thought about roads taken and not taken. He'd been drifting for 3 years, taking each day as it came, not looking too far ahead or behind. But now there was Clara to think about. She needed more than a drifter's life. She needed stability, safety, a chance to build something new from the ashes of her old life. He could give her that. Maybe, if she'd let him, if Thornton stayed gone, if a dozen other things fell right. It was a lot of ifs, but sitting there under those diamond stars, listening to her breathe, Samuel thought maybe it was worth the gamble. He'd kept her safe through the storm. Now came the harder part, keeping her safe from everything else the world might throw at them. But he'd made a promise, and Samuel Hawkins was a man who kept his promises. The fire crackled, sending sparks up toward the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its pack, and in the cottonwood grove, 2 unlikely friends slept, while the vast frontier stretched endlessly around them, full of danger and possibility in equal measure. Murphy's station squatted on the landscape like a toad made of logs and ambition. It wasn't much: a trading post, a stable, a few rough cabins for travelers who didn't mind fleas and questionable company. But it had what they needed: supplies and anonymity. Old Murphy himself stood behind the counter as they entered. A grizzled specimen who looked like he'd been carved from the same weathered wood as his establishment. His eyes, sharp despite the roomy appearance, took in Clara's bruised face and torn dress, then shifted to Samuel with the calculating look of a man who'd survived by minding his own business. "Help you folks?" His voice sounded like gravel in a tin cup. "Need supplies," Samuel said, "and the lady needs proper clothes, whatever you've got that'll fit." Murphy nodded, already reaching under the counter. "Got some dresses in trade last month. Belonged to a woman headed back east. Couldn't take the frontier life." He produced a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Might suit." Clara took the bundle with steady hands. "Is there somewhere I could—" "A back room?" Murphy jerked his thumb toward a curtained doorway. "Water in the pitcher if you need it." While Clara changed, Samuel set about gathering necessities. Ammunition first. You could never have too much. Then food, flour, salt pork, coffee, dried beans, a precious tin of peaches that would be a luxury on the trail. He added 2 blankets, a proper cookpot, and a canvas pack to carry it all. "Heading far?" Murphy asked, tallying the goods. "Far enough." The old man's eyes flicked toward the curtained doorway. "Trouble following?" Samuel met his gaze steadily. "Could be. Well, ain't none of my business. But there was a fellow through here yesterday asking about a woman, dark-haired, pretty. Said she was his wife. Run off." Murphy spat tobacco juice into a brass spittoon. "Course, lots of fellows say lots of things." "This fellow have a name?" "Didn't give one. City clothes, soft hands. Had 2 rougher types with him." Murphy's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped a notch. One of them was nursing a bandaged wrist, so Thornton hadn't given up. He'd just changed tactics. Scouting ahead instead of pursuing directly. Smart. Samuel filed the information away. Clara emerged from the back room, and for a moment Samuel forgot about Thornton entirely. The dress was simple brown calico, nothing fancy, but it fit reasonably well. She'd washed her face and pinned her hair back, and despite the fading bruises, she looked like she belonged out here. Strong. Capable. Better? She asked, smoothing the skirt self-consciously. Much better, Samuel said, meaning it. Murphy added the cost of the dress to their tab. As Samuel counted out payment, the old trader threw in a heavy shawl and a pair of sturdy boots. On the house, he said gruffly. Woman needs proper footwear out here. Clara's eyes misted. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. That's very kind. Ain't kindness, just sense. Dead customers don't come back to trade. But his weathered face softened a fraction. They were loading their purchases onto Duchess when a Mexican boy ran up, breathless and wide-eyed. He gabbled something in Spanish to Murphy, who listened with growing concern. What is it? Samuel asked. Murphy turned to them, his face grim. Riders coming, 6 of them from the south, moving fast. 6 men. Thornton had gotten reinforcements. Samuel's mind raced through options. They couldn't outrun 6 men on 1 horse, not with Clara still healing. The trading post was defensible but would put Murphy at risk. And there were other travelers here, a family with children in one of the cabins, an old prospector sleeping off a drunk in the stable. Is there another way out? Clara asked Murphy. A back trail? The old man scratched his beard. There's an old Indian path leads up through Widow's Canyon. Rough going, but it comes out near the Denver Road. Your horse could manage it. Maybe. Maybe isn't good enough. Samuel made a decision. Clara, take Duchess. Follow that path. I'll catch up. No. Her chin came up in that way he was beginning to recognize. We stay together. Clara! We stay together, she repeated firmly. I won't have you fighting my battles alone. There wasn't time to argue. The dust cloud on the southern horizon was already visible. Samuel turned to Murphy. You willing to stand by what's right? The old trader considered. Been a while since I picked a side in anything. But I don't hold with men who beat women. He reached under the counter again, this time producing a sawed-off shotgun. Might be I'm feeling partisan today. I can shoot, the prospector called from the stable doorway. He was weaving slightly, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been. If'n you got a spare iron. Samuel felt a grim smile tug at his mouth. Frontier justice had its own rules, and they were about to write a new chapter. He positioned Clara inside the trading post with his rifle. Watch the windows. Anyone tries to come through, you shoot. Don't hesitate. She nodded, checking the rifle's action like he'd shown her. Quick learner indeed. Samuel took position on the porch with Murphy. The prospector, who introduced himself as Jeb, wobbled over to join them, clutching an ancient pepperbox pistol Murphy had provided. A hell of a thing, Jeb muttered. Man can't even drink in peace anymore. The riders came into view, throwing up a cloud of dust that glittered in the afternoon sun. Samuel recognized Thornton immediately, still in his city coat but riding harder now, his face set with determination. Jake was there too, his wrists splinted and tied to his chest. The younger cousin. And 3 new men, hired guns by the look of them, with low-slung holsters and faces that had forgotten how to smile. They reined up just outside easy shotgun range. Thornton pushed forward, trying to look commanding despite the dust coating his fine clothes. I'm looking for my wife, he called out. Clara Thornton. I have reason to believe she's here. No Thorntons here, Murphy replied calmly. Just honest folk going about their business. I'll pay for information, $100. I don't need your money. One of the hired guns, a lean man with dead eyes and a week's growth of beard, spoke up. Maybe we should look for ourselves. Make sure you're not harboring a runaway wife. This is my property, Murphy said. You ain't welcome without invitation. Now, Thornton tried to sound reasonable. No need for unpleasantness. I just want what's mine. Already told you, Samuel stepped into view, hand resting on his Colt. She belongs to herself. Thornton's face darkened. You again. I should have known. He looked around, taking in the armed men on the porch. You can't think 3 old men and a drunk can stand against us. 4, Clara said, appearing in the doorway with the rifle. And I'm getting better with this every day. Clara. Thornton's voice changed, trying for the charm that must have worked on her once. Darling, please come home. We can work this out. I was angry before, said things I didn't mean. But you know I care for you. You watched them beat me. Her voice was steady as the rifle in her hands. You left me to die. That was Margaret's doing, her family, and I tried to stop them. Liar. The word cracked like a whip. You're a liar and a coward, William, and I'm done with you. The lean gunman shifted in his saddle. We doing this or not, Thornton? You're paying us to retrieve your woman, not chat. She's not going anywhere with you, Samuel said. 6 against 4. I like those odds. You ever been in a real fight? Samuel asked conversationally. Not a back alley beating or intimidating shopkeepers. A real bullets flying, men dying fight? The gunman's eyes narrowed. Have you? A Sharpsburg, Gettysburg, Cold Harbor. Samuel let the names sink in. I've sent more men to their maker than you've had hot dinners. Your choice whether to add to that tally. A moment of silence. The wind kicked up dust devils between the two groups. Somewhere, a dog barked. Then several things happened at once. The family Samuel had noticed earlier, a man, woman, and 2 young boys, emerged from their cabin. The man carried an old hunting rifle. Heard there might be trouble, he said, taking position with the defenders. Don't hold with men forcing women, not in front of my boys. From the other direction came the sound of horses. A lot of horses, everyone tensed, hands moving to weapons. Around the bend came a sight that made Samuel's heart lift. A cavalry patrol. 8 men in blue with a young lieutenant at their head. They'd been heading for the trading post anyway, but the timing couldn't have been better. The lieutenant took in the scene with a glance. Armed men facing off, a woman with a rifle, the tension thick as molasses. What's all this then? Domestic dispute, Thornton said quickly. I'm trying to retrieve my wife. These men are interfering. That's so, the lieutenant looked at Clara. Ma'am, are you this man's wife? No. Clara's voice rang clear. I am not. He's the man who had me beaten and left for dead. These gentlemen saved my life. The lieutenant studied her bruised face, his expression hardening. I see. And you, sir? He addressed Thornton. Can you prove this woman is your wife? That is... Thornton floundered. Everyone in Perdition knows... We're not in Perdition. We're in the Colorado Territory, where the law says a man can't drag off a woman against her will, wife or not. The lieutenant's hand rested on his sidearm. I suggest you gentlemen move along. The lean gunman spat. This ain't over. It is as far as the United States Army is concerned. The lieutenant's voice could have frozen whiskey. Unless you'd like to continue this discussion at Fort Lyon? The hired guns exchanged glances. Fighting civilians was one thing. Taking on cavalry was another calculation entirely. Let's go, one of them said. This ain't worth dying for. Ooh, wait, Thornton's voice cracked with desperation. I'm paying you. Not enough for this. The lean one turned his horse. Find another way to handle your woman problems. They rode off, leaving Thornton with just his cousins. Jake looked ready to follow the hired guns. The younger one kept glancing nervously at the soldiers. This isn't finished, Thornton said to Clara. None, you can't just walk away. You owe me. I owe you nothing. Clara lowered the rifle but kept it ready. Whatever was between us died the night you let them hurt me. Go home to your wife, William. Forget I existed. I'll ruin you. I'll make sure everyone knows what you are." "A woman who survived?" Clara smiled sadly. "I can live with that reputation." Thornton looked around for support, found none. Even his cousins were edging away. Finally, with a curse that made the lieutenant frown, he yanked his horse around and spurred it viciously. His cousins followed, Jake cradling his injured wrist. Everyone watched until they disappeared from view. Then the lieutenant dismounted, approaching Clara with his hat in his hand. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Gardner. Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm healing, thank you." Clara finally set the rifle aside. "Your timing was providential, Lieutenant." "Happy to help. We're headed to Fort Lyon. You'd be welcome to travel with us if you're going that direction." Samuel felt Clara look at him. Fort Lyon meant safety, civilization, a chance for her to disappear into a larger town. It was a good offer. "That's kind of you," Clara said. "Could we have a moment to discuss it?" "Of course. We need to resupply anyway." Gardner touched his hat brim and moved off to talk with Murphy about purchases. Clara stepped close to Samuel. "What do you think?" "I think you'd be safe with them. Could catch a stage from Fort Lyon to anywhere you want to go." "That's not what I asked." She studied his face. "What do you think we should do?" There was that word again. "Depends what you want," Samuel said carefully. "Safety's one thing, but what kind of life are you looking for?" Clara was quiet for a moment, watching the soldiers joke with Murphy as they dickered over prices. "I thought I wanted respectability, a proper life in a proper town. That's what led me to William." She turned back to Samuel. "Maybe it's time I tried something different." "Different how?" "There's land opening up north of Denver. Homestead Act. A person could file a claim, build something." She hesitated. "Two people could file adjoining claims, build something together." Samuel's heart did something complicated in his chest. "That's hard living. No schools to teach at, no society, just work and weather and hope. And freedom." Clara's eyes were bright. "No one asking about my past, no one judging, just the chance to make something new. You'd need help, building a cabin, proving up the land when it's not work for one person." "No," she agreed, "it's not." They looked at each other for a long moment. Around them, life went on, Murphy haggling with the lieutenant, Jeb heading back to the stable with his bottle, the family returning to their cabin. But for Samuel and Clara, the world had narrowed to just this choice. "Partners." Samuel extended his hand. Clara took it, her grip firm despite everything she'd been through. Partners. They spent the night at Murphy's. Samuel bunking with Jeb in the stable while Clara took the small room behind the store. The cavalry patrol camped outside, their presence ensuring no trouble would come calling. In the morning, they set out with the soldiers as far as the Denver road. Lieutenant Gardner had offered to see them all the way to Fort Lyon, but they'd declined. They had their own path to follow now. At the crossroads, Gardner shook Samuel's hand. "You take care of the lady." "I intend to." The lieutenant turned to Clara. "Ma'am, if that man gives you any more trouble, you send word to Fort Lyon. The Army doesn't look kindly on men who abuse women." "Thank you, Lieutenant. But I don't think William will trouble us again. He's a coward at heart, without his hired men, without his town to back him." She shrugged. "He'll find some other woman to charm and destroy." "His loss," Gardner said gallantly, making Clara smile. They watched the patrol ride away, then turned their own horses. They'd bought a steady mare for Clara at Murphy's, toward the mountains, north, toward Denver, toward land that could be theirs if they could hold it. "Scared?" Samuel asked as they rode. "Terrified," Clara admitted, "but excited too. Is that strange?" "Not at all. Fear and excitement often travel together out here." They rode in companionable silence for a while. The sun climbed higher, warming their backs. The mountains stood purple-blue in the distance, promising and threatening in equal measure. "Samuel?" Clara said eventually. "Hmm? Hey, thank you for everything. I know I've said it before, but no need. We're partners now. Remember, partners look out for each other." "Yes," she said softly, "then they do." As they created a rise, the land spread out before them, endless grass beginning to green with spring, streams glinting silver in the sun, the whole vast promise of the frontier waiting. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing out here was. But riding beside Clara, heading toward a future they'd build with their own hands, Samuel felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The past was behind them, her shame, his drift. Ahead lay only what they could make of it. And that, Samuel thought, was freedom enough for anyone. The morning mist clung to the valley like smoke from a dying fire. Samuel had been awake since before dawn, that old soldier's instinct prickling at the back of his neck. Something was coming. He could feel it in the air, see it in the way the birds stayed silent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. They'd made good progress north, were maybe 3 days out from the land office in Denver where they could file their claims, 3 days from starting new lives. But Samuel had learned long ago that when you could almost touch what you wanted, that's when fate liked to snatch it away. He was checking the horses when Clara emerged from the small tent they'd bought at Murphy's. She moved easier now, the worst of her injuries fading to yellow-green memories on her skin. But she caught his tension immediately. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Maybe nothing." He didn't want to worry her, but she deserved the truth. "Maybe something. Feel like eyes on us since yesterday." Clara's hand went unconsciously to the pocket where she kept the little derringer Murphy had thrown in with her boots. Samuel had taught her to shoot properly with it, and she'd taken to it like she'd taken to everything else about frontier life, with determination and surprising skill. "William? It could be, or could be regular road agents, or could be my imagination." He tightened the mare's cinch. "But I think we should move. Now." They broke camp with practiced efficiency. 2 weeks on the trail had taught them to work together, anticipating each other's movements. Clara rolled blankets while Samuel doused the fire. She packed the coffee pot while he saddled Duchess. No wasted motion. No need for words. They were mounted and moving as the sun crested the eastern hills, painting the frost-covered grass gold. The trail wound through a series of shallow valleys, following a creek that would eventually join the South Platte. Good water, good grass, the kind of land they hoped to claim for themselves. Samuel kept them moving at a steady pace, not fast enough to tire the horses, but not dawdling either. His Winchester rode across his saddle, and he'd made sure Clara had her derringer close to hand. Just in case. The attacks came at the worst possible place, a narrow defile where the trail squeezed between the creek and a wall of red rock. Samuel heard the shot a split second before Duchess screamed and went down, blood blooming across her shoulder. He kicked free of the stirrups as the mare fell, grabbed the Winchester, and rolled behind a fallen log just as more shots cracked through the air. Splinters exploded from the log inches from his face. Clara. He couldn't see her, couldn't tell if she'd been hit. "I'm here." Her voice came from behind a cluster of boulders 20 feet away. "I'm all right." Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by cold rage. Duchess was struggling to rise, blood pumping from her shoulder. His horse, his faithful companion who'd carried him through storms and saved his life more than once. "Samuel Hawkins." The voice echoed off the rocks. "Thornton, of course. You've led me quite a chase. He thought you'd given up. Thornton." Samuel peeked around the log, trying to spot positions. Muzzle flash from the rocks above, at least one shooter there, another behind the cottonwoods across the creek. Give up? You took something that belongs to me. I always collect what's mine. She doesn't belong to you. The law says different. I've got marriage papers now. Witnesses who'll swear she's my wife. Thornton sounded pleased with himself. Amazing what money can buy. Clara's laugh rang out, sharp and defiant. Forgeries won't make it true, William. True doesn't matter, legal matters, and then legally you're my property. Another shot, this one sparking off the rocks near Clara. Samuel's jaw tightened. They were pinned down good. At least 3 shooters, maybe more, with the high ground. But Samuel hadn't survived 4 years of war by giving up when things looked bad. He studied the terrain with a soldier's eye. The shooter in the rocks had good position but would have to expose himself to get a clean shot. The one in the cottonwoods had better cover but worse angle. And Thornton himself. Where was Thornton? Here's my offer, Thornton called. Send Clara out and you can ride away. Well, walk away, since your horse seems to be having difficulties. No one needs to die today. Duchess had stopped struggling, her breath coming in great heaving gasps. Samuel's finger tightened on the Winchester's trigger. A counteroffer, he called back. You and your men mount up and leave, last chance. You're hardly in a position to make demands. I've got ammunition and patience. How about your men? They ready to sit in those rocks all day, all night? Gets mighty cold up here after dark. Silence for a moment. Then the crack of a rifle from the cottonwoods. The bullet whined past Samuel's ear. Too close. He snapped off a return shot, saw bark explode from a tree trunk. The shooter cursed and ducked back. William, Clara called out. You want to know why I could never truly be yours? Shut up, Clara. Because you're a coward. You hire others to do your killing. You let others do your beating. You've never fought for anything yourself in your life. I said shut up. Samuel smiled grimly. Clara was doing more than venting anger. She was provoking Thornton, trying to make him careless. Smart woman. Is that why your wife despises you? Clara continued. Because she knows what you really are? A weak man hiding behind money and family connections? Jake shut her up. Movement in the rocks. Jake, the one with the injured wrist, rising up to get a shot at Clara. Samuel had been waiting for it. The Winchester bucked against his shoulder, and Jake spun backward with a cry. Return fire from the cottonwoods drove Samuel back down, but he'd seen what he needed. Jake was out of the fight, maybe permanently. That evened the odds some. You bastard. That was the younger cousin, Tom. You killed him. Shouldn't have come looking for a fight then. More shots, a furious exchange that filled the air with gun smoke and splinters. Samuel kept low, conserving ammunition, making each shot count. The shooter in the cottonwoods was getting nervous, firing too fast, wasting bullets. Then, sudden as it started, the shooting stopped. In the echoing silence, Samuel heard something that made his blood run cold, horses approaching from the north. More of Thornton's men? Or, morning, folks, a new voice, cheerful and calm. Quite a racket you're making. Mind if I ask what's the occasion? Samuel risked a look. 3 men on horseback had appeared on the trail, badges glinting on their chests, a sheriff and 2 deputies by the look of them. The sheriff was an older man with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who'd kept law in rough places. Sheriff! Thornton emerged from behind a boulder, trying to look like the injured party. Thank God. I'm William Thornton from Perdition. These outlaws kidnapped my wife. We're trying to effect a rescue. The sheriff's eyes took in the scene. Samuel behind his log, Clara in the rocks, Duchess dying in the trail, Jake's body visible above. That's so, and you are, this to Samuel. Samuel Hawkins, the lady's no more his wife than I am. He had her beaten near to death, left her to die in a storm. I found her, helped her get away. Now he's trying to drag her back. Lies, Thornton sputtered. I have papers. I'm sure you do. The sheriff's voice was dry as dust. Tell me, Mr. Thornton, if she's your wife, why is she hiding in them rocks instead of running to you? She's confused. These outlaws have filled her head with lies. I can speak for myself. Clara stood up slowly, hands visible. Even at a distance, the fading bruises on her face were clear. My name is Clara Mayfield. Not Thornton, never Thornton. This man had me beaten when I tried to leave him. These marks on my face, his family's work. The sheriff studied her for a long moment. Ma'am, are you saying you're not this man's wife? I'm saying I'm a free woman who wants nothing more than to be left in peace. Sheriff, you can't just take her word. Thornton started. Actually, I can... The sheriff's hand rested on his pistol. See, I got a wire yesterday from Fort Lyon. Lieutenant Gardner. You know him? Said there might be trouble heading this way. Said a woman named Clara had been beaten and threatened, and a man named Samuel Hawkins had been protecting her. Gave pretty good descriptions, too. Thornton's face went pale. That's not... I have rights. You have the right to surrender your weapons and come with us. You and whoever's still breathing up there. The sheriff's voice hardened. You've killed a good horse and disturbed the peace of my county. That's enough to hold you while we sort this out. This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? Don't much care. In my jurisdiction, the law applies to everyone. The sheriff turned to his deputies. Tom, climb up and check on that fellow in the rocks. Bill, collect weapons from anyone still vertical. The younger cousin in the cottonwoods threw down his rifle and emerged, hands high. Don't shoot, I'm done. Samuel stood slowly, keeping the Winchester ready but not threatening. He moved to where Duchess lay, knelt beside her. The mare's eyes found his, already glazing with pain and loss. I'm sorry, girl, he whispered, stroking her neck. You deserved better. Clara appeared beside him, tears streaming down her face. She'd loved the mare too, had spent hours brushing her, talking to her on the trail. She saved us, Clara said softly. If she hadn't taken that bullet. Samuel nodded, drew his Colt. One shot, and Duchess's suffering ended. The echo seemed to hang in the air forever. Hawkins, the sheriff had approached, respectful of their grief. I'll need to ask you some questions, get your side official. But Gardner's wire was pretty clear. You were defending the lady, nothing more. What about him? Samuel jerked his head toward Thornton, who was being disarmed by a deputy. He'll spend some time in my jail. Then, if the lady doesn't want to press charges, he'll be encouraged to head back to perdition and stay there. The sheriff's smile was thin. I'll make sure he understands the consequences of coming back. Clara stood, wiping her eyes. I don't want to press charges, I just want him gone, forever. Understandable, though if you change your mind. I won't. I want to move forward, not back. The sheriff nodded. What about the dead man? Jake Thornton, the younger cousin supplied when he looked shaken, all fight gone. William's brother-in-law. Well, Mr. Thornton, seems your rescue mission has cost you dear. The sheriff's voice held no sympathy. Maybe next time you'll think twice before taking the law into your own hands. It took the rest of the morning to sort things out. Jake's body was wrapped and loaded on his horse. Thornton and Tom were cuffed and mounted, ready for the ride to jail. The shooter from the cottonwoods turned out to be one of the hired guns from Murphy's, caught by greed and Thornton's promises. The sheriff offered them a ride to town, but Clara shook her head. We'll manage. We've come this far on our own. You sure? It's a fair walk, and you've only got the one horse now. We're sure, Samuel said. They'd already transferred their supplies to Clara's mare. It would be slow going, but they'd make it. As the sheriff's party prepared to leave, Thornton made one last attempt. Clara, please. Think about what you're doing. You're throwing away respectability, a place in society. I'm choosing freedom, Clara said simply, but something you'd never understand. They watched the riders disappear down the trail, taking Thornton and the past with them. Then Samuel and Clara stood alone in the defile, with only the creek's babble and the wind for company. I'm sorry about Duchess, Clara said quietly. She was a good horse, the best. Samuel cleared his throat. We should move. Find a place to camp before dark. They walked in silence for a while, leading Clara's mare. The sun climbed higher, warming the day. Birds began to sing again, as if the morning's violence had never happened. Do you think he'll really stay away? Clara asked eventually. I think he's a coward who just lost his brother-in-law trying to drag back a woman who doesn't want him. I think he'll slink home, tell his wife whatever story saves his pride, and find someone else to torment. And if he doesn't? Samuel looked at her. Then we'll face it, together, like we faced this. She nodded, satisfied. They kept walking, two figures small against the vastness of the frontier. Behind them lay violence and pain. Ahead waited Denver, the land office, and the chance to build something new. It wouldn't be easy. They'd need a new horse, more supplies. The land would fight them every step, drought and storms, cold and heat. But walking beside Clara, Samuel felt that same hope he'd experienced days ago. Stronger now for having been tested. They'd faced down the past and won. Now it was time to claim their future. As the day wore on and they climbed toward the next ridge, Samuel found himself thinking about Duchess. The mare had carried him so far through so much. Her last act had been to save them. Taking the bullet meant for him or Clara. We'll name something after her, Clara said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. When we build our place, Duchess Creek or Duchess Ridge. Something so she's not forgotten. Samuel's throat tightened. She'd like that. They crested the ridge as the sun began its descent. Before them, the land rolled on endlessly, purple mountains in the distance like promises. Somewhere out there was the piece of earth that would be theirs. Ready? Clara asked. Ready? Samuel confirmed. They started down the other side, toward whatever tomorrow would bring. The past was done. Thornton was gone. They were free, and freedom, Samuel thought as Clara began to hum softly beside him, was worth any price they'd had to pay. The land office in Denver smelled of ink and ambition. Samuel watched Clara sign her name to the homestead claim with a steady hand, her signature flowing across the paper like a declaration of independence. 160 acres in her name alone. The law wouldn't let a woman file jointly with a man unless they were married. But it would let her claim land as a single woman. Now you, Mr. Hawkins, the clerk said, sliding another set of papers across the desk. Your parcel adjoins Miss Mayfield's to the north. Samuel signed, and just like that they owned 320 acres between them. Raw land that had never known a plow, where the grass grew tall and the nearest neighbor would be 5 miles distant. It wasn't much by Texas standards, but it was theirs, outside the land office. Denver bustled around them, freight wagons, businessmen in bowler hats, ladies with parasols picking their way around mud puddles. Clara stood on the boardwalk, holding her copy of the claim paper like it might disappear if she loosened her grip. We did it, she said softly. You're the easy part, Samuel reminded her. Now we have to prove up, 5 years of improvements, or it goes back to the government. 5 years. She smiled. I can't imagine 5 days ahead, much less 5 years. They spent the rest of the day gathering supplies. Samuel had sold his saddle and tack. No point keeping them without a horse, and Clara had pawned the gold watch from her bag. Between that and their remaining funds, they had enough for the essentials: tools, seed, a plow blade, nails, a cook stove that would have to be freighted out once they had a cabin to put it in. The general store owner, a German named Hendrik, threw in a milk cow that had gone dry. She's not much, he admitted, but she'll give milk again come spring if you treat her right. You'll need her more than I do. Clara's eyes misted. These small kindnesses from strangers still caught her off guard. Thank you, Mr. Hendrik. We'll take good care of her. They spent one last night in civilization, taking cheap rooms at a boarding house. Samuel lay awake listening to the sounds of the city, pianos from the saloons, dogs barking, the occasional gunshot. Tomorrow they'd leave this behind for the silence of the prairie. Part of him couldn't wait. They set out at dawn, Clara's mare pulling a borrowed wagon loaded with their supplies, the cow plodding along behind. The journey to their land took 2 days, following tracks that grew fainter the farther they went from town. By the second afternoon, they were truly alone, the grass sea stretching endlessly under a bowl of blue sky. There, Samuel said finally, checking his compass against the surveyor's marks. That ridge, everything from there to the creek is yours. Mine starts on the other side. Clara stood in the wagon bed, shading her eyes. The land rolled gently, covered in buffalo grass and wildflowers. A line of cottonwoods marked the creek's course. To the west, the mountains rose like a wall, still snow-capped despite the warming weather. It's perfect, she breathed. They made camp by the creek, under the cottonwoods. While Clara tended the animals and started supper, Samuel walked the boundaries, getting a feel for the land. Good soil, from what he could tell. Plenty of water. The southern exposure would help with crops. They could build the cabins on the rise, safe from flooding but close enough to water. That night they sat by the fire, planning. 2 cabins to start. Propriety demanded that much, even out here. But they'd build them close, within shouting distance, share the work, share the tools, share the burden of making raw land into a home. "He will need to get the gardens in first," Clara said, ever practical. "Then at least a lean-to for shelter while we build proper cabins. A hay for the animals, too. That grass won't last through winter if we get heavy snow." They talked until the fire burned low, mapping out a future in words. It felt fragile, like speaking too loud might shatter it, but it also felt real in a way nothing had since before the war. Spring arrived in earnest over the following weeks. Samuel threw himself into the work with a dedication that surprised him. He'd been drifting so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to build instead of just survive. They raised a 3-sided shelter first, just enough to keep the rain off. Then Clara's cabin, small but tight, with a good stone fireplace and real glass windows they'd hauled from Denver. Clara worked alongside him when she wasn't tending the garden she'd started. She learned to handle tools, to think ahead about construction. Her hands grew calloused, her skin brown from the sun. The delicate school teacher was disappearing, replaced by something stronger. "You're different," Samuel told her one evening as they sat on the porch of her finished cabin, admiring their handiwork. "So are you," she studied him. "You smile more, talk more." "I got more to talk about, I guess." His own cabin went up faster, with Clara helping. Nothing fancy. He didn't need much, but it was solid, built to last, the first home he'd had since Virginia. Summer brought its own challenges. The garden struggled until Clara figured out irrigation ditches from the creek. Grasshoppers came in clouds, eating everything in sight until she mixed up a concoction of soap and tobacco juice that drove them off. A hailstorm flattened the corn, but the potatoes survived. Through it all, they worked as partners. Samuel would finish his chores and find Clara wrestling with a fence post, or she'd appear with water when he was cutting hay under the brutal sun. They fell into rhythms, unspoken understandings. This needed doing, so they did it. Together, the first test came in late July. Samuel had ridden Clara's mare to the nearest town for supplies, leaving Clara alone. When he returned near sunset, he found her on her porch, rifle across her lap, watching two riders disappear into the distance. "Trouble?" he asked, swinging down from the mare. Drifters, wanted food and wouldn't take no for an answer. She set the rifle aside, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "I convinced them to move along." "You all right?" "Fine. They were just hungry, I think, but..." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I kept thinking, what if they come back? What if there are more next time?" Samuel understood. Two people alone out here were vulnerable. No matter how well armed, they needed more than guns. They needed community. As if in answer to that need, neighbors began to appear. The Fullers, a young couple with 2 children, claimed land 10 miles east. An older man named Peterson, veteran like Samuel, settled to the south with his grown sons. The Washingtons, a freed slave and his family, took up land along the creek. "Never thought I'd farm alongside colored folks," Peterson admitted at the cabin raising they organized for the Washingtons. "But they work hard as anyone, harder, maybe." "Times are changing," Samuel said, handing him another plank. "Maybe so," Peterson spat tobacco juice. "Maybe it's about time." Clara organized a school that fall, gathering the scattered children once a week for lessons in her cabin. Payment was whatever families could spare: eggs, preserves, help with chores. Samuel built benches and a blackboard, found himself staying to listen sometimes. She was a natural teacher, patient but firm, making learning feel like adventure rather than chore. Winter arrived early and hard. The first blizzard caught them unprepared, and Samuel barely made it from his cabin to Clara's, following the rope they'd strung between the buildings. They spent 3 days snowed in together, melting snow for water, rationing food, keeping the fire fed. "This is what you saved me from," Clara said one night, watching the snow drive past the windows. "Except I was alone and freezing." "You're not alone now." "No," she smiled. "I'm not." When the storm passed, they found the cow dead in the lean-to, frozen despite the shelter. It was a hard blow. They'd been counting on her for milk come spring, but the Fullers had a calf to spare, and the Washingtons traded hay for help with their roof repair. Neighbors, community, the thing that made survival possible. Spring came again, and with it, a letter. Clara found it waiting at the post office during a supply run. She read it twice, then handed it to Samuel without a word. It was from Thornton's wife, brief, formal, but its message clear. William was dead, killed in a dispute over cards. The letter said, though it hinted at darker truths. She thought Clara should know. She wished her well in her new life. Clara stared out at their land, the cabins, the growing gardens, the neighbors' smoke rising in the distance. "I should feel something," she said. "Sadness, relief, something. But I just feel empty." "He was part of your past," Samuel said carefully. "That's all. He doesn't touch what you've built here." "What we've built." She folded the letter, tucked it away. I think I'll plant roses this year, by the porch. Something beautiful to look at. Summer brought abundance. The garden overflowed with vegetables. Clara's hens produced more eggs than they could eat. Samuel's wheat field rippled gold in the wind. They worked dawn to dark, preserving food, cutting hay, improvements the Homestead Act required, but that also fed body and soul. The Fullers organized a harvest dance in their new barn. Musicians appeared as if by magic, Peterson on fiddle, Washington's eldest on guitar. Clara wore her best dress, the brown calico from Murphy's carefully mended and pressed. "A dance?" Samuel asked, suddenly shy. "I thought you'd never ask." They moved together under lantern light, her hand warm in his. And Samuel realized something had shifted. They'd been partners so long, working toward shared goals, that he'd almost missed the moment when partnership became something deeper. "Walking home under the stars," Clara said, "and the 5 years are almost half gone. Time flies when you're building a life." "Is that what we're doing? Building a life? What would you call it?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I'd call it home." Fall painted the land in golds and reds. They worked together, bringing in the harvest, Clara driving the wagon while Samuel pitched wheat sheaves. The easy rhythm between them had deepened into something that didn't need words. A look could convey what needed doing. A touch could say what mattered. One evening, as they sat on Samuel's porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Clara said, "I've been thinking about those roses." "What about them?" "Maybe I should plant them between the cabins, one in the middle ground." Samuel turned to look at her. She was watching him with that steady gaze he'd come to rely on, the one that had faced down Thornton and blizzards and grasshoppers with equal determination. "Roses need tending," he said carefully, "regular care, attention." "Yes," she agreed, "they do. It might be easier if the gardener didn't have to walk so far to tend them." "That's what I was thinking." They sat in silence as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Then Samuel asked, "You sure?" "I've been sure for a while now, but the question is, are you?" Instead of answering with words, he took her hand. Work roughened now, capable and strong, but still perfectly fitted to his. "We'll need to make it legal," he said. "Proper papers and all. Don't want any question about the land claims." Clara laughed, that free sound he'd first heard so many months ago. "Samuel Hawkins, was that a proposal?" "I suppose it was, not very romantic talking about land claims." "It's perfect." She squeezed his hand. "After all, we're partners. Have been from the start." "Partners," he agreed. They were married that October, in the Fuller's barn with all their neighbors present. Clara wore a new dress she'd made herself, blue like the one she'd worn when he found her, but this one whole and clean and chosen freely. Samuel had trimmed his beard and bought a new shirt that itched terribly but made Clara smile. Peterson played his fiddle as they danced, and the Washingtons had made a cake with real sugar frosting. The children from Clara's school scattered wheat kernels for fertility and good fortune. It was simple and perfect in theirs. That night, in what was now their single cabin, Samuel's had become a workshop and storage. They lay listening to the wind in the cottonwoods. "No regrets?" Samuel asked. "About what? Choosing the wrong man in perdition? Being beaten and left to die? Meeting you?" Clara propped herself on an elbow to look at him. "I regret the pain, but without it I wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here, so no. No real regrets." "I never expected this," Samuel admitted. "When I stopped in that storm, I was just trying to do the right thing. And you did. You've been doing it ever since." She traced a finger along his jaw. "My drifter, who doesn't drift anymore, found something worth staying for. Winter came gentler that year, or maybe they were just better prepared." The root cellar was full, hay stacked high, firewood split and ready. When storms came, they had each other for company. Clara taught Samuel to read better. He'd always struggled with letters while he taught her to work leather and mend harnesses. Spring brought a letter from the land office. Both their claims had been proved up early, based on the improvements they'd made. The land was theirs, free and clear. "We did it," Clara said, holding the papers. "We really did it." "Just the beginning," Samuel reminded her. "Now we build it bigger, better. Maybe add some cattle next year. Definitely those roses you wanted." "About that." Clara smiled in a way that made his heart skip. "We might want to build something else first. A room addition, maybe." It took him a moment to understand. Then he was lifting her, spinning her around while she laughed and protested and held on tight. "When?" he asked, setting her down gently. "The harvest time, near as I can figure." Samuel looked out at their land, the green wheat already showing. The garden Clara had started, the solid cabins and fences and all they'd built from nothing but determination and hope. "Best harvest we'll ever have," he said. Clara leaned into him, her hand finding his like it always did now. "Yes," she agreed, "the very best." As the sun climbed higher, warming the earth and calling them to another day's work. They stood together on the porch of the home they'd made. Behind them lay all the roads that had brought them here, the pain and loss, the fear and fighting. Ahead stretched years of seasons and storms, joys and sorrows. But they'd meet them as they'd met everything else. Together. And that, Samuel thought as Clara began planning aloud where to put the addition, was all the safety either of them would ever need. The late spring afternoon cast long shadows across the homestead as Clara sat on the porch, her hands busy with mending while she watched Samuel work in the garden. 3 years had passed since their wedding, and the land showed it, fences straight and strong, fields carved from prairie, a proper barn raising its peaked roof against the sky. The addition Samuel had built before their daughter was born stood solid against the original cabin and through the window. Clara could see 2-year-old Emma napping in her crib. A son had followed the next year, James, named for Samuel's brother who hadn't made it home from the war. He was with the Fuller children today, learning to gather eggs and terrorizing chickens. "A letter came," Samuel called, walking up from the road where he'd met the mail carrier. His stride was easy, confident, so different from the wary drifter she'd first known. Clara set aside her sewing, noting the careful way he held the envelope. "Bad news?" "Don't know yet." He handed it to her. "It's addressed to you, from Perdition." Her hands stilled. They'd had no word from that place since learning of William's death. She thought that chapter closed forever. The letter was from Mrs. Abigail Morrison, president of the Perdition Ladies' Aid Society. Clara read it twice, then looked up to find Samuel watching her with concern. "The school teacher they hired after I left has run off with a traveling salesman," she said slowly. "They're asking if I'd consider returning. They're offering twice what they paid before, plus a house and guaranteed 3-year contract." Samuel's jaw tightened. "After what they did to you?" "Mrs. Morrison says the town has changed. William's widow remarried and moved to California. The family that hurt me has fallen on hard times, bad investments. She says there's new people, new attitudes." Clara folded the letter carefully. "She says they need someone with my experience, someone who understands frontier children. What do you think?" Clara looked out at their land. The roses she'd planted between the cabins had taken hold, climbing the trellis Samuel had built. The wheat field rippled gold-green in the breeze. This was home. Hard-won and deeply loved. "I think they made their choice 4 years ago," she said, And we made ours. Samuel sat beside her, taking her hand. You sure? Teaching was important to you. I still teach, every week, right here. She gestured toward the cabin where she held lessons for the growing number of local children. The only difference is the payment comes in eggs and apple butter instead of cash money. The cash would help. We could get that new plow, maybe another milk cow. Clara studied him. You're arguing for it? I'm making sure you've thought it through. Whatever you decide, we decide together. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. The offer was tempting in its way. Security, respect, a chance to prove to those who'd wronged her that she'd risen above their cruelty. But, do you remember what you said that first night when you found me? I'll keep you safe. You've done that, more than that. You gave me a life where I don't need their approval or their money. She tore the letter in half, then quarters. Let them find another teacher. I have everything I need right here. Samuel's smile was slow but warm. Mrs. Morrison won't be pleased. Mrs. Morrison should have spoken up 4 years ago when they were tying me to a tree. Clara stood, brushing off her apron. Now, help me start supper. The Washingtons are coming by to discuss sharing the cost of a windmill. They worked together in the kitchen, the easy rhythm of long partnership. Clara told him about Emma's new word, horse, though it sounded more like hoss, and he shared his plans for expanding the wheat field. Normal conversation for a normal evening, except for the torn letter in the kindling box. After supper, with the Washingtons gone and the children asleep, they sat on the porch as was their custom. The mountains caught the last light, turning purple and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. I've been thinking, Samuel said, a dangerous habit, about promises. He was quiet for a moment, choosing words. I promised to keep you safe, but what I really did was give you space to save yourself. Clara turned to look at him. What brings this on? That letter. Seeing you tear it up without hesitation, you're not the scared woman I found in the snow anymore. No, she agreed, I'm not. But I wouldn't be who I am now without you. Without this. She gestured at the darkening land. We saved each other. Samuel. That's what partners do. He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear. The night sounds started up, crickets, a distant owl, the whisper of wind through grass. James said his first sentence today, Clara said after a while. What was it? Papa home. When he saw you coming in from the field. Samuel's arm tightened around her. Home. Such a simple word for something that had taken so much work to build. But build it they had, board by board, season by season. We should put up a sign, he said suddenly, at the road, Hawkins Farm or something. Why now? Because this isn't just a homestead anymore. It's established, permanent, ours. Clara smiled in the darkness. I know what to put on it. What's that? Safe Haven Farm, because that's what it's been from the start. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, I like it. We'll paint it nice. Make it official. You'll have to teach me. I've never painted a sign. Another skill for your collection. What is it now? Farming, shooting, birthing calves, making soap, preserving everything that grows? Don't forget escaping blizzards and facing down ex-lovers. How could I forget that? They laughed together, the sound carrying across their fields. Inside, Emma stirred but didn't wake. The house settled around them with small creaks and sighs, the sound of a building that had weathered seasons and would weather many more. Samuel, Clara said as they prepared to go inside. I want you to know something. If that letter had come the first year or even the second, I might have been tempted. not to go back, but to prove something to them, to show them they were wrong about me. And now I know they don't matter. Their opinion, their judgment, none of it touches what we have here. She turned to face him in the doorway. You didn't just keep me safe from them. You kept me safe from needing their validation. Clara, I mean it. That's the real safety you gave me, the freedom to be myself without apology. He kissed her then, there in the doorway of the home they'd built, with the vast prairie spreading out behind them and their children sleeping peacefully inside. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Come on, Clara said, tugging him inside. Morning comes early and we've got a sign to make. Over the following days, Samuel crafted the sign from good oak planks, sanding them smooth while Clara practiced her letters on scrap wood. The children helped by getting into the paint and leaving small handprints on the back. So everyone knows a family lives here, Clara said, declining to clean them off. When it was finished, they loaded it in the wagon and drove out to where their property met the main road. The Fullers came to watch, and the Petersons, and even the Washingtons rode over to see what the fuss was about. Safe Haven Farm, Mrs. DeFuller read aloud. Oh, that's lovely. Clara. Fitting, Peterson agreed, then added gruffly. You folks have made this a better place to live, safer for all of us, having good neighbors. Samuel and Mr. Washington dug the post holes while the women supervised and the children ran wild. When the sign was finally mounted, straight and proud, everyone stood back to admire it. You need something, Emma announced with 2-year-old authority. What's that, sweet pea? Clara asked. Flowers? So they planted wildflower seeds around the base, the children patting the earth enthusiastically if not skillfully. Years later, those flowers would reseed and spread, creating a welcome splash of color that travelers would remember long after they'd passed. That evening, as they drove home, James asleep in Clara's lap and Emma chattering about the pretty sign, Samuel reached over to take his wife's hand. No regrets? He asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. None, Clara said firmly, not one. They drove on in companionable silence, the new sign standing behind them like a declaration. Safe Haven Farm, a place of refuge that had become a home, a promise that had become a life. As they turned into their lane, the cabin came into view, windows glowing warm in the gathering dusk. The roses climbed their trellis, the barn stood solid against the sky, and the fields stretched out in neat rows, all of it theirs, all of it earned through work and tears and stubborn determination. You know what I think? Clara said as Samuel helped her down from the wagon. What's that? I think we should frame that letter from perdition. Hang it in the kitchen as a reminder. A reminder of what? That we choose our own path, that no amount of money or respectability matters if it comes at the cost of who we are. She shifted James in her arms, the boy murmuring in his sleep. That safety isn't about walls or weapons. It's about having the courage to build the life you want. Samuel lifted Emma, who wrapped her arms around his neck. Wise words from a school teacher. Former school teacher, Clara corrected. Now I'm a farmer's wife, a mother, a neighbor, a woman who knows her own worth. Is that all? She smiled, that bright, free smile he'd first seen years ago and never tired of. And a woman who's kept safe by a man who keeps his promises. They went inside together, their children in their arms, their land spreading out around them in the darkness. The sign at the road would weather and fade over the years, would need repainting and eventually replacing. But what it represented, the safety found not in isolation but in connection, not in running but in standing firm, that would endure. In the kitchen, Clara did frame the torn letter, piecing it back together just enough to be readable. She hung it next to Emma's first drawing and a photograph of Samuel's parents he'd carried through the war. Reminders all of where they'd come from and how far they'd traveled. "Safe," James murmured in his sleep as she tucked him into bed. "Yes, sweetheart," Clara whispered, kissing his forehead. Safe. And they were. Not because the world had stopped being dangerous. There would be other storms, other threats, other challenges in the years to come. But because they'd learned the greatest safety came from within. From knowing who you were, from having people who stood with you, from building something worth protecting. Samuel appeared in the doorway, Emma already asleep on his shoulder. They stood together for a moment, watching their son sleep, sharing the quiet satisfaction of another day ended well. "Thank you," Clara said softly. "For what?" "For stopping that night, for seeing me, for keeping your promise." He shifted Emma gently, freed one hand to touch Clara's cheek. "Thank you for being worth stopping for." They put Emma to bed, banked the fire, and retired to their own room. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside was warmth and light and the peculiar peace that comes from being exactly where you belong. And at the road, the new sign stood sentinel in the darkness, its message clear to any who passed. Here is safety. Here is home. Here promises are kept, and lives are built with careful hands and steady hearts. Safe Haven Farm. Now and always. 20 years had weathered the sign at the road, fading its letters but not its meaning. Samuel stood before it now, paintbrush in hand, carefully tracing over the words Safe Haven Farm as he'd done every few years since they'd first hung it. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and his hands weren't as steady as they'd once been. But the pride he felt looking at those words remained unchanged. "Grandpa! Grandpa!" A small tornado of pigtails and energy came racing down the lane. "Grandma says come quick! The travelers are here!" Samuel smiled, setting down his brush. "Tell her I'm coming. Lucy." His granddaughter, Emma's eldest, scampered back toward the house, which had grown over the years into a rambling structure that could accommodate their expanding family and the steady stream of visitors who found their way to Safe Haven Farm. It had started simply enough. Word spread along the frontier about the farm where a woman beaten and left for dead had found safety, where she and her rescuer had built something lasting. Occasionally, someone would appear at their door, a woman fleeing a cruel husband, a family burned out by drought, drifters who'd lost their way. Clara never turned anyone away. Now, as Samuel walked up the lane, he could see the latest arrivals, a young woman with a baby in her arms and fear in her eyes, accompanied by an older couple who looked like they'd been riding hard for days. Clara stood on the porch, her hair silver now, but her bearing still straight and strong. She was speaking quietly to the woman, who clutched her baby tighter and nodded. The years had deepened the lines around Clara's eyes, but they were laugh lines mostly, earned through decades of joy mixed with sorrow. "Samuel," Clara called, "could you show Mr. and Mrs. Patterson to the guest cabin and ask James to bring fresh water?" Their son, now 20 and tall like his father, was already heading that way with buckets. Emma emerged from the house with blankets, her own 2 children trailing behind. The family moved with practiced efficiency, each knowing their role in welcoming strangers who arrived seeking haven. Later, after the Pattersons were settled and the young woman she'd given her name only as Mary had been fed and given a bed in Emma's old room, Samuel and Clara sat on their porch as they had for so many years. "She's running from someone," Clara said quietly. "Won't say who yet, but she will. They always do, once they feel safe. How many does that make this year?" 15, not counting the harvest workers or the folks just passing through. Clara smiled. Remember when we thought this land would be lonely? Samuel chuckled. Now we can't seem to keep people away. It was true. What had started as simple frontier hospitality had evolved into something more. The guest cabin had been built 10 years ago when it became clear they needed more space. The summer kitchen followed, expanding their ability to feed travelers. The Fullers and Petersons often sent supplies, and the Washingtons, prosperous now with their expanded holdings, contributed what they could. A letter from Denver came while you were painting, Clara said, producing an official-looking envelope. From that organization. Samuel knew which one she meant. The Women's Aid Society had been after Clara for years to help establish a formal network of safe houses across the territory. They wanted to use Safe Haven Farm as a model. What do they want now? Same as always. They want me to travel, speak at meetings, help set up similar places. Clara set the letter aside. I gave them the same answer as always, which was that anyone who wants to learn what we do is welcome to come here and see for themselves. I'm not leaving. She reached for his hand. Everything I need to teach them is right here. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of children playing and the evening songs of birds. The farm spread before them, not just the original homestead now, but a small community. James had claimed his own quarter section adjacent to theirs. Emma and her husband, Thomas, a blacksmith from town, had built on the southern border. The land that had once seemed so vast and empty now teemed with life. Do you ever think about how different it might have been? Clara asked. If you hadn't stopped that night. Sometime, Samuel squeezed her hand, but not with regret. How could I regret the path that led to this? Papa, Mama, James called from the barn. That new mare is finally letting me near her. They walked together to see. Samuel's arm around Clara's waist. The mare, a beautiful sorrel they'd bought from a family moving back east, had been skittish and fearful, clearly mistreated by previous owners. James had been working with her patiently for weeks. See, James said proudly as the mare took oats from his hand. She just needed time to trust. Most creatures do, Clara said, thinking of the young woman in the house. Trust can't be forced. It has to be earned. Speaking of trust, Thomas appeared from his forge, wiping soot from his hands. Mrs. Patterson told me why they're here. Her daughter, that's Mary, was being forced into marriage with a man 3 times her age. A business arrangement between him and her father. When she refused, things got ugly. Samuel's jaw tightened. Some things never changed. How ugly? Ugly enough that her mother finally stood up to her husband and got Mary away. They've been riding for a week, staying off main roads. Thomas's expression was grim. The father's put out word he's offering a reward for their return. Then they'll stay as long as they need, Clara said firmly. And if anyone comes looking, they'll find what men always find when they come here with ill intent. Samuel finished. Neighbors who stand together. That night, Mary joined them for supper, her baby peaceful in the cradle Emma had pulled from storage. Around the big table sat their family and guests, the Washingtons who'd stopped by with preserves, and old Peterson, now widowed but still spry enough to ride over for Clara's cooking. I don't understand, Mary said quietly, looking around the table. Why are you helping us? You don't know us. Clara smiled. 24 years ago, I was you, hurt, scared, running from a man who thought he owned me. Someone, she glanced at Samuel, decided I was worth helping. Now we pass that on. But the risk is worth it, Emma interrupted, bouncing her youngest on her knee. That's what Mama and Papa taught us. That safety isn't something you hoard, it's something you share. After supper, Samuel found himself walking the property, checking fences and gates as was his habit. The moon was full, silvering the wheat fields and casting long shadows from the buildings. He paused at the spot where he'd built Clara's first cabin, now incorporated into the main house. So much had grown from that simple shelter. He couldn't sleep either. Clara appeared beside him, wrapped in a shawl. Just thinking. About promises, about how keeping one small promise led to all this. He gestured at the farm, the cabins, the life they'd built. I told you I'd keep you safe. Look what you did with that safety. We did, she corrected. Everything here we built together. They walked on, past the barn where Duchess was buried. They'd planted an apple tree there, and it bloomed beautiful every spring. Past the school building they'd raised 5 years ago when Clara's informal lessons had outgrown the house. Past the root cellar and the smokehouse and all the infrastructure of a working farm. There's something I need to tell you, Clara said as they circled back toward the house. Samuel felt a flutter of concern. Clara's health had been good, but they weren't young anymore. What is it? Mary's father, the man she's running from. His name is Thornton, William's cousin. Samuel stopped walking. You're certain? She mentioned the name and the connection to perdition. It seems cruelty runs in that family. Clara's voice was steady, but he could hear the steel underneath. He's wealthy now, from what Mary says. Powerful. And he holds grudges like his cousin did. You think he'll come here? I think when he learns where they've gone, and he will learn, eventually he'll come. The question is whether we're ready. Samuel considered this. They'd faced down William Thornton when they were young and alone. Now they had children, grandchildren, neighbors, a whole community that had grown up around the principle that some things were worth defending. We're ready, he said simply. The test came 3 weeks later. Samuel was teaching young Tom Fuller, grandson of their old neighbors, how to mend harness when riders appeared on the road. 6 of them, led by a man whose resemblance to William Thornton was strong enough to make Samuel's hand move instinctively to where his gun used to rest. But he didn't wear guns anymore, hadn't for years. There were other ways to deal with trouble now. Mr. Hawkins. The leader's voice was cultured, cold. I'm Charles Thornton. I believe you're harboring my daughter and wife. I'm sheltering 2 women and a baby who came seeking help, Samuel replied calmly. That's what we do here. My daughter is young, impressionable. She's been led astray by her mother's foolishness. I've come to take them home. Have you? Clara appeared on the porch, and Samuel saw Thornton's eyes widen in recognition. Behind her stood James with his rifle, Thomas with his hammer, and old Peterson with the scattergun he claimed was just for crows. You, Thornton's face darkened. I know who you are, what you are. You think you can keep my family from me? I think, Clara said clearly, that your daughter is a grown woman who made her choice, as did your wife. They're free to leave whenever they wish, but they don't wish to leave with you. More neighbors were arriving, word having spread as it always did. The Washingtons rode up, followed by their grown sons. The latest Fuller generation appeared from the fields. Even the circuit preacher, who happened to be visiting, stood quietly with his Bible, a witness to whatever might unfold. Thornton looked around, calculating odds. This is kidnapping. I'll have the law on you. Feel free, Clara said. Sheriff Morrison, you might remember his wife. She wrote me a letter once. He knows where we are. So does Marshal Bennett in Denver. They know what we do here and why. Do you really want to explain to them why you're trying to force your daughter into marriage against her will? She's my daughter. She's a person, Clara countered, not property. The standoff stretched taut. Then Mary herself appeared, baby in her arms, her mother beside her. She walked past Clara, past the armed men, straight to her father's horse. "I'm not coming back," she said quietly. "Not to you, not to him. I'll make my own way. You'll starve. You'll end up like—" Thornton's eyes flicked to Clara. "Like Mrs. Hawkins?" Mary lifted her chin. "A respected woman with a loving family and a home that shelters those in need? I should be so fortunate." "Get her," Thornton ordered his men. Nobody moved. "I said—" "We heard you," one of the riders said. "But we didn't sign on to fight a whole town over a girl who don't want to go. You want her that bad, get her yourself." Thornton's face went purple. He started to dismount, but stopped when every person in the yard took a step forward. Not threatening, exactly. Just, "Ready? And this isn't over," he snarled. "Yes," Mary said quietly. "It is. Leave. Father, don't come back, and there's nothing for you here." Something in her voice, the finality, the absence of fear, seemed to reach him. Or maybe it was the united front of the community, the clear message that some battles weren't worth fighting. Whatever the reason. Charles Thornton turned his horse and rode away, his hired men trailing behind. The yard stayed quiet until the riders disappeared from view. Then Emma said, "Well, I better get supper started. Looks like we're feeding an army tonight." The tension broke, people laughing and talking as they dispersed. Mary sagged against her mother, who held her close. Clara went to them, speaking quietly, and after a moment all three women were crying, but it looked like relief, not sorrow. That evening, Safe Haven Farm lived up to its name as a celebration. Long tables were set up in the yard, loaded with food everyone had contributed. Stories were told, songs were sung, and Mary was welcomed formally into the community that had chosen to protect her. Samuel found himself standing apart for a moment, watching it all. Clara appeared at his elbow, slipping her hand into his. "No shots fired," she said. "No one hurt, just people standing together. We've come a long way from that cabin in the snow." "You've come a long way," he corrected. "I just tried to keep up." "Still keeping me safe?" "Always. Though these days it seems you're keeping everyone else safe too." She smiled, leaning into him. "That's what you do with safety, Samuel. You share it. You multiply it. You build something that lasts longer than any one person." As if to prove her point, Lucy ran up dragging a younger cousin. "Grandma Clara, tell us the story about the storm and the rescue and the bad man." "Which bad man?" Clara asked, settling onto a bench. "There were several. All of them." Soon a circle of children had gathered, and Clara began the tale they never tired of hearing. How Grandpa Samuel had found her in a blizzard. How they'd fought off the men who wanted to hurt her. How they'd built the farm from nothing but prairie grass and determination. Samuel listened with half an ear, having heard it many times. But he never tired of watching Clara tell it, seeing how she shaped the narrative for young ears, keeping the harsh truths while emphasizing the important parts. Courage, kindness, the power of community. "And they lived happily ever after?" Lucy prompted at the end, as always. "They lived," Clara said, gathering the little girl close. "With all the joys and sorrows that brings, but yes, they were happy, because they were together, and they were safe, and they made sure others could be safe too." The party went on late into the night. Mary and her mother were offered the guest cabin for as long as they needed. Plans were made to help them establish themselves. Perhaps Mary could help with the school, her mother with the garden. There was always work for willing hands, finally. As the moon set and the last neighbors headed home, Samuel and Clara stood once more on their porch. The house was quiet, full of sleeping family and guests. The farm spread peaceful under the stars. "You kept your word," Clara said softly, echoing what she'd said years ago. "You've kept it every day for 24 years. And I will," Samuel replied, pulling her close, "as long as I breathe." She tilted her face up to look at him. "Do you remember what I said that day at Murphy's? That everyone deserves a second chance?" "I remember. We've given dozens of people that chance now, hundreds, if you count all who've passed through." She smiled. "All because you stopped in a storm. All because you were brave enough to build something from that stop." They went inside together, checking on sleeping grandchildren, banking the fire, securing the doors, not against danger, but against the cool night air. The house settled around them with familiar creaks, full of life and memory. In their room, Clara paused by the window that looked out toward the road. The sign wasn't visible in the darkness, but she knew it was there. Safe Haven Farm. More than a name now, a promise to anyone who needed it. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, watching her. "That I'm grateful. For you. For this life. For the ability to pass on what we've learned." She turned from the window. "And that I love you. My drifter who learned to stay." "And I love you," he replied, "my teacher who never stopped teaching." They lay down together in the bed they'd shared for 2 decades, in the room they'd built with their own hands, in the home that had become a beacon for others seeking safety. Outside, the wind sang through the wheat fields, and somewhere a night bird called. Safe at last. Safe always. Not because the world had become less dangerous, but because they'd learned the secret. True safety came from opening your heart, not closing it, from building community, not walls, from keeping promises, especially the hard ones. And as sleep took them, Samuel's last thought was the same as his first that night in the storm. "I'll keep you safe." A promise made. A promise kept. A promise multiplied beyond anything he could have imagined. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Throughout the house, people slept peacefully, protected by more than walls and weapons. Protected by the simple, revolutionary idea that everyone deserved safety, and that those who had found it had a duty to share it. Safe Haven Farm, now and always. A place where promises were kept and lives rebuilt, where the broken found wholeness and the lost found home. And at first light, when the rooster crowed and the day's work began again, those promises would continue. Season after season, year after year, as constant as the sunrise and as enduring as the land itself.